Phantom Forces at first glance may seem like a simple shooter on the Roblox platform, but you'll quickly come to realize that that is far from the reality of the situation. Because Phantom Forces is far from being simple. With over 150 guns in 12 plus categories, there is a lot to learn from the get-go. And Stylus, being the open-minded and beginner-friendly developers, decided to scrap any sort of in-game tutorial in favor of an automatic console that justifies camping and grenade spam every 7 seconds. Now, the addition of ranked 78 M16A3 hypersweats being in literally every lobby obviously doesn't help new players get a good feel for the game, and despite there being multiple videos trying to offer advice already, the advice they actually offer leaves more to be desired.
The Coyote and Barska Electro are actually different models, although they're incredibly similar.
Now, as a person who plays this game semi-frequently, I took it upon myself to make not only a tutorial for newer viewers, but also a complete in-depth guide that can help anyone become just as good as the ranked 200 players that constantly steal your MVP bonus credits. Anyways, as customary, this video is split up into 3 different skill levels, and timestamps for them are on the screen and down in the description. So without further ado, welcome to Phantom Forces, and here's everything you need to know. So before we get into anything, let's quickly run you through the basics of Phantom Forces interface. Right off the bat, you'll have several options like the 2 deploy buttons on the top left. Deploy spawns you in a random spawn on your team's side, but you also have the ability to spawn on a teammate via squad deploy, which can be useful for getting to objectives or sneaky positions faster. To the right, you'll be able to see your current class and weapon loadout alongside the current map and map voting. To open or close the map voting, you simply just need to click on the map vote UI. Down on the middle of the screen, you have your stats, which includes your KDR, rank, next weapon unlock, and so on. Then there's also the weapon loadout where you can customize and choose your guns, the inventory where you can obtain or trade in skins, the customize tab, which is basically just paying an absurd price to stick out from the rest in chat, and lastly the server browser and settings, which we'll get into now. So before you jump headfirst into battle, let's start off simple by getting you familiar with the game's UI and customize it to your liking in the settings tab. Now, Phantom Forces has 3 main settings that you can change. Game, which is basically mouse and keyboard controls, Display, which determines the in-game visuals and UI, and lastly Advanced, which includes first-person animation and blood settings. You won't need to worry that much about Advanced because we're mainly going to focus on the 2 other ones. Now, there are 3 main ways you can adjust the settings. Some you can just toggle on or off by clicking, others have sliders you can drag back and forth. However, if you know what specific value you're after, you can also just click on the number and type the value in. Anyways, now let's run through some recommended settings that will enhance your gameplay experience. Let's start off by changing your FOV to 95, as that is a good base FOV that can work for anyone. Moving on to mouse settings, if you play with an 800 DPI mouse with default Roblox camera sensitivity settings, I recommend adjusting mouse sensitivity between 0.7 and 0.8 and the ADS multiplier to 0.8 to 0.9. But mouse sensitivity is of course a complex case that's completely up to preference, so if you don't feel like this preset works for you, then feel free to mess around with the sliders for a bit. However, before you go crazy, try to keep them within the 0.5 to 1.2 range, as anything past that is pretty much unplayable. In the keyboard settings, you want to disable both sprint options, as they may end up messing you up in combat due to the way they interact with the complex movement techniques that we'll dive into later. Now, for console players, I have a few videos linked in the description that I would recommend watching to help adjust your controller sensitivity and controls. Now let's move on to the display settings. Keep in mind that this will be catered towards gameplay advantages and optimizing frames per second. In game objects, you want to disable pretty much everything, as things like particle sparks and bullet casings take up a lot of processing power that could be going towards higher frames per second. Meanwhile, visual objects like ragdolls can often confuse you on what is and what isn't an enemy, plus enemies may sometimes prone face down to look like a ragdoll as a sort of camouflage, so by turning ragdolls off you won't get tricked by those kinds of tactics or end up shooting at the wrong thing. Now, you don't have to worry too much about HUD settings, as a lot of them are pretty important, but as you would expect from an FPS game, this game can get pretty toxic, so I would recommend that you disable the chat so you can actually focus on having fun rather than getting yelled at for using a shotgun. In the rendering tab, you once again want to disable pretty much everything except for the first-person skins. This is because the Phantom Forces characters walk around wearing all the black camo, so trying to shoot them during the nighttime with shaders on is an absolute nightmare. And also, better graphics usually means lower frames per second. For scale settings, you can pretty much keep everything as default, as that is purely up to preference, although I do recommend changing the leaderboard scale to 1.35, as that makes it much more readable than the default. Now that you've configured your settings, here are a few chat commands you'll want to know. First of all, if you want to coordinate something with your team without anyone on the enemy team seeing it and therefore being aware of your epic plans, simply type % before any message to enter your team chat, where all messages you send can't be seen by the opposing team. Now, if you don't know, Phantom Forces has a vote kick system that's often used for kicking hackers or people who get more than 20 kills a match. To initiate a vote kick, you'll need to type /votekick : their username : your reason. Although keep in mind that you'll need to be rank 25 or above to be able to vote kick people, and also your reason can't be the length of the entire B-movie script. Now, pro tip, you don't actually have to type in the full username. The console can actually recognize if the username you've typed is a shortened version. So, for example, if you're trying to vote kick someone named the average _PF player, then you only need to type in /votekick : the average : and then of course your reason, and the console would still recognize who you're trying to kick. And on the topic of chat commands, if you go so far as to own a VIP server, then not only do you have access to everything except for staff guns, but you also have access to the Stylus map databases, where you can choose from the 11 different databases of maps that Stylus have made available. To access these databases, you gotta type in the command /databases : and then the page number, and each page has 7 options, meaning in this case there are 2 total database pages. Now to open these databases, you have to type in /maps : and then the database you chose. In this case, it would be /maps : production, and then it would be greeted with a list of maps that are currently in the main game. Anyways, after you found a map, then you have to type in the command /map : Gamemode, which you can see the short versions of now, and then another : for the time, which, pro tip, you can actually set the timer to infinite if you type inf as the time. And if you set the game mode to something like Team Deathmatch, you can actually set how many kills are required to win by adding an extra number to the end of the command. Now, there are also some commands related to the in-game UI, specifically the scale. If you type in the command /Uiscale : and then the specific value you want, you can actually make your UI larger or completely disappear for that matter. However, Uiscale doesn't affect the UI on the main menu, so to change that, you have to type in the command /Menuscale : and then once again the value you want. In Phantom Forces, you're split up into 2 teams, the Phantoms and the Ghosts. Now you can actually manually change what team you're on in VIP servers. To do that, you have to type in the command /switch : and then either P or G depending on whether you're a Ghost or Phantom. And another fun fact about owning a VIP server is that as the owner, you don't need to host a vote kick to remove someone from your server. You actually have the power to just straight up kick someone by typing in the command /kick : and then the person's username. Now that we've configured as much as possible, let's talk servers, because believe it or not, you can actually also configure them a little. More precisely, you can use the Phantom Forces server browser to search for specific maps, game modes, and server regions. The server browser is also available on the Roblox games page under the name PFUI Hub Dev, so you don't have to join the main game to access the server browser. Anyways, on the main menu, you'll have 4 main options. Play, which is like the regular Roblox play button that just chooses a random server to join. Ranked, which isn't actually functional as of making this video, however is likely to lead to servers related to the Stylus Competitive League, also known as the SCL. Server browser, which leads to the main UI of the PF Hub Dev server browser. And lastly, My Servers, which isn't actually functional as of this video either, however will most likely contain all the servers that you mark as favorites, alongside VIP servers that you own or have access to. Anyways, the main thing you're going to be using is the server browser option, so let's run you through the main UI and all its features. Now when you first open the main UI, you'll probably notice the several different pages of servers available to play in the Browse tab, including special servers such as high capacity or test play servers. Additionally, you'll be able to see specific server names and what those servers' current map and game mode are, alongside how much time is left off that round and what the server region is, which can make finding specific matches like for example Desert Storm King of the Hill in a US server with at least 7 minutes or over pretty easy. Luckily, if you ever want to play on a specific server another time, you're able to mark servers as favorites by either clicking the little box on the left side, or you can manually click on the server and mark it as favorite with the favorite button. These servers will then appear under the favorites tab in the main UI. But while we're here, let's explore this small little info page. So when you click on a server, you'll be informed about the current map and game mode alongside potential other maps and game modes that are in that server's rotation. These server rotations may vary in the future if specific 24/7 servers are implemented. You'll also be able to know if any of your friends are currently on that specific server, however you'll also be able to see what servers your friends are playing on via the Friends tab in the main UI. Additionally, this page contains match settings, which mostly will only apply to ranked servers as certain gun categories are actually banned in the SCL. This comes alongside some miscellaneous information about that specific server in question. To exit this small little info page, you must simply press the button marked back. Anyways, to actually join a server via the server browser, you'll have to click on that server in question and then press the join button. But what if you're looking for a server in a specific region with a certain map? Well, all that and more can be found in the search tab. With the search tab, you're able to pick a specific map you're looking for alongside your preferred game mode and what region of the world you want to play with. Additionally, if you're looking for a specific server, whether that be a high capacity or test play server, you can use the search bar to locate it instead of manually searching page after page of servers. And as a last tip before we get into the main game, remember to refresh the list once in a while, as the list of servers available is a list that doesn't update after you join the server browser, which can be an inconvenience if you're, for example, waiting for a YouTuber event server to open up. And now let's move on to probably one of the most important parts of Phantom Forces. So let's start off real simple and gradually move on to the advanced movement. So of course there's WASD to move forward, left, right and back, spacebar to jump, C to crouch, and then either control or double tap C to prone. Press and hold shift to sprint unless you have sprint toggle on in settings, in which case you just press shift once to sprint. While sprinting, press C to perform a slide. While sliding off a roof or elevated platform, press shift right before you're about to land to perform a Zingus Slide. Angled ladders can be climbed a lot faster by pressing spacebar while facing the opposite way of the ladder. This is also known as Proxy Ladder Boosting. You can also use ladders to cancel fall damage by touching them just before you touch the ground. If you're near an object or ledge, press spacebar to vault over it. This can be done while sprinting to boost forward momentum and can even be combined with the Zingus Slide for even greater speeds. While sprinting, press X or Z to perform a dolphin dive. Which one of these buttons you press may depend on your hardware. For example, Mac computers use Z to super jump while Windows computer uses X. This can also be combined with a jump to perform a super jump. The input for said super jump is sprint plus spacebar plus X or Z. While sprinting, press spacebar and C at almost the exact same time and release the shift key immediately after. Then jump and press shift at near the same time again to perform an EMP slide. If you're trying to perform an EMP slide, if you press C shortly after pressing spacebar, you'll slide in midair. This can then be combined with shift when you land to perform a mud slide, which is basically a sort of mini Zingus slide. Now before you jump into a round with the new movement you've just learned, it's important to know the flow of a match so you actually know what to do when you're spawned in. Phantom Forces has 7 different game modes, each playing differently from one another and therefore alter the match flow. First off, there's Team Deathmatch, which is just about getting as many kills as you can for a total of 200 kills to win. Flare Domination is where you have 3 different points that you have to capture and defend until your team reaches a grand total of 250 points. King of the Hill is where it's all or nothing defense in a single area until the opposing team's point tally has completely drained from 600 down to 0. Standing on the hill drains points faster and the effect is multiplied by every extra teammate on it. You're also awarded a small amount of XP for standing on the hill every 10 seconds. Capture the Flag is where you have to carry a brightly colored briefcase from the enemy base to your base. Once you pick up the flag, you'll have 15 seconds to make it as far as you can until your location is outlined and revealed to the entire enemy team. Kill Confirmed and Tag Run has you collect tags until you reach a total of 200 tags collected. And Tag Run is different from Kill Confirmed because you're required to go to one of 3 different points to manually drop off your tags. And lastly, there's Hardpoint, which is basically King of the Hill, but now you have to stand directly on the point to earn points. These points are earned for every second you stand on the point, and each additional person standing on it multiplies the points gained per second. When a match ends, the person who ended up top scoring on the winning team will get an MVP bonus of 50 credits, while the rest of the team gets a randomized case or key drop. Meanwhile, the losing team is rewarded with all the dread that comes from spending 50 minutes only to lose by a singular point in the last 10 seconds of the match because some guy tossed a random grenade that somehow wiped out your entire team. Now let's move on to some starter tips and tactics to implement into your gameplay. Now let's start off with a very basic but also essential tip. When playing Phantom Forces, it's important to utilize its various different game mechanics, as most of them are actually quite helpful. Starting off with chambering. Chambering is a mechanic that affects all guns with a magazine and allows you to have an extra bullet in your gun by simply reloading while your gun is loaded. You want to avoid staying in one spot for too long, as Phantom Forces has a kill cam that is basically just 5 seconds of staring into the back of the head of the dude who just killed you, which completely gives away their location. And trust me, you'll run into a lot of people who go for revenge kills right off the bat, so try to stay agile and move spots often. On the topic of staying agile, try to be unpredictable and don't move in a straight line. This will really make it harder for enemies to predict and be ready for you. And by avoiding moving in a straight line, you'll make life for the enemy M107 main an absolute nightmare. Sticking to the topic of movement, strafing is by far one of the most important fundamentals to nail down, as properly strafing actually takes a bit of know-how to properly learn. See, there are quite a few mistakes players make related to strafing, the most common one being players who just spam A and D. Just stop. Not only does it not make you harder to hit at all, but it actually only ends up making you more inaccurate as your barrel still sways in the direction you're moving, making your aim equivalent to playing tennis with your mouse. Effectively strafing is going from one side to another for a good second or two, as that actually changes your position and can throw your enemy off. Strafing can also be good for hitting moving targets, as moving in the same direction as them allows your bullets to sync up more easily with the target. Now, due to Phantom Force's map design, you'll have a lot of instances where you might get camped. For example, one scenario you'll run into a lot is ladder camping, because when you climb a ladder normally, you are unable to aim or shoot anyone reliably. But if you face upwards before getting on a ladder, you'll actually be able to properly use your guns, which can be really useful to get rid of opposing ladder campers. And now let's talk about probably one of the most overpowered tactics in the entirety of Phantom Forces: flanking. Flanking is by far one of the best strategies in this game just because of how fast you can die in this game. Since most guns barely take more than 12 milliseconds to kill someone, they'll barely have any time to react even if you miss one or two of your shots. Flanking is the key to most scenarios in this game, and some maps are a flank haven. Seriously, flanking is what can score you some pretty high kill games. In fact, flanking can also save you from getting spawn camped, taking back a massively camped hill, get you some sweet multi-kills in the beginning of a round, etc. If there's one gameplay tactic I recommend you main, then it would definitely be flanking. Now, depending on what kind of player you are, you may contribute more or less to objectives during each round. Some of you watching this may stick to the objective like a magnet, while others completely ignore it. Nevertheless, playing the objective and winning the round is what's going to get you those MVP bonuses. But what exactly is the perfect balance between playing the objective and getting kills? I would recommend playing the objective for around 1/3 or 1/4 of the match to ensure your team actually ends up winning the round. For example, if the game mode is hardpoint, try sticking to the point in the beginning until it moves spots to give your team a good head start and gradually drop in here and there to make sure your team stays in the lead. If it's game modes like Cough or Flare Domination, try capturing the points around 5 times or more during each match. If your team is also playing the objective, you can effectively rely on them to keep a good score going, and you'll only need to drop in if you can see that your team is starting to lose the head start that you gave them. It's important to remember that you don't need a huge lead to win, you just need to be a single point or more ahead to win the round and get those credits. And so on the topic of credits, let's move on to the actual guns you'll have available to you at an early rank. Now, despite popular belief, you really do not need to pre-buy guns, as the ones you have available from the get-go can easily wipe the floor. So as an additional tip, don't go spending your credits on pre-buying certain weapons just because some YouTuber said it was good. In fact, some of the all-time greats in the games are actually starter guns like the M4A1 and Intervention, the M4A1 being a great accurate 3-shot weapon, and the Intervention still standing as the undefeated best sniper in the game. Seriously, some real firepower is awarded at the lower ranks, with prime examples like the M14, M1911, and MP7. All of these guns can handle themselves really well in a fight, do really good damage, or fire incredibly fast. But how do you actually know whether a gun 3 shots or fires really fast? Well, all of that information can be found on the right side stat page displayed within the weapon layout menu. This screen displays all the basic but essential information like damage, fire rate, ammo capacity, and fire modes. But back to the 3-shot thing. A gun has to do a minimum of 34 damage or 33.34 damage if you want to get really precise in order to be able to 3-shot. If it does below that, it will end up being a 4-shot, and if your gun's damage drops below 25, it'll become a 5-shot, and so on. Also, fun fact, you're actually able to change the damage output of your gun through the use of ammo types and conversions. Now, the average RPM for most guns is around 750 fire rate, so guns with fire rate above that tend to be more consistent, especially if they also do more than 33 maximum damage. Although it's also important to look at how much ammo capacity your gun has, as some guns like the Beowulf ECR have a pretty small ammo capacity that's important to take into account when you're using those weapons. There are also some guns that are locked into specific fire modes like the M16A4 and G11 being locked to burst fire, or DMRs like the Scar SSR and Mark 11 being locked to semi-auto. Now, if there's one thing about Phantom Forces that is absolutely essential to learn, then it's definitely gotta be attachments. Attachments are single-handedly the most important thing about Phantom Forces, as they can make or break your weapon of choice. But while Phantom Forces has well over 100 different individual attachments, with sights and conversions taking up the majority of the list, you only need to learn about the core 4 and a few other niche attachments. So let's start off with learning about the core 4 attachments, as those are by far going to be what you're going to be using on well over the majority of your guns. The core 4 attachments are called the core 4 because they're available on every primary and work incredibly well together. For example, the Muzzle Stubby combo is by far one of the best for reducing recoil and works well with the majority of assault rifles and LMGs. However, not every gun suffers from ridiculous recoil, which is where the compensator folding combo comes into play. The comp folding comes especially handy on guns with low recoil but bad accuracy like PDWs. However, it's not just the core 4 that are important. Attachments like the Romanian Hera CQR grip alongside T-Break and X-Ring are also important to utilize. Grips like the Hera CQR and Romanian are incredibly good, however suffer from lack of accessibility due to the fact that they are only available on a small portion of guns. But what exactly makes these two grips different from the stubby or folding? Well, it's because of their upsides. The Romanian grip is incredibly good for very high recoil guns like the AK or FAL family. Meanwhile, the Hera CQR grip is a jack-of-all-trades grip that reduces all kinds of recoil to a smaller degree. And the Hera also has the unique effect of drastically reducing scope sway, making it a prime grip for snipers that have it available. And the best part of it all is, the only major downside with this grip is having the slowest ADS speed of all grips alongside again low accessibility. On the topic of grips, there's one more grip to take note of, and that is the skeleton grip. This grip provides a great boost to ADS speed in exchange for more unstable recoil, however this effect is completely nullified if it's used on pump or bolt action guns. This is why the skeleton grip is by far one of the best grip to use on shotguns or sniper rifles due to the fact that they don't have the same recoil problems because of the way they work. However, just a quick heads up, you only want to use the skeleton grip on slow snipers as its biggest downside is doubling scope sway whilst also drastically lowering your scope steady time. Also, you may have noticed that some guns have access to different barrels in the game, such as the squad or carbine barrel. Now there are quite a few long barrel variants, however you can pretty much disregard all of them except for the squad and heavy barrel, as both of these are practically a direct upgrade that you should absolutely use if your gun has it available. But it's not only the barrels you're able to modify, you're actually also able to change your gun's stock. Now there are quite a few stock attachments in Phantom Forces, the most notable being retract and remove stock, full stock, and then the extended stocks. Now these stock attachments could do various things. For example, remove stock can boost movement speed in exchange for worse recoil, while full stock can reduce general recoil and make your gun more accurate. Stocks that have any abbreviation of the word extend or the name of the gun directly mainly reduce rotational recoil in exchange for added camera recoil. And lastly, collapsible stocks are basically a direct speed boost with no considerable downsides. Now, despite being available on all guns, you don't want to rock the X-Ring or T-Break on absolutely everything, because like the Hera and Romanian grip, they are niche attachments that only really have a play with a certain handful of guns. Let's start with the T-Break first. The T-Break is basically a compensator and muzzle brake fused into one and affects camera recoil to a lesser degree than that of the compensator or muzzle brake. The T-Break is a fantastic all-round choice on guns with lower unspecific recoil like the M16A3. However, due to the way it's designed, if you're ever unsure on what to use on a gun, the T-Break serves as a good middle ground choice that works well with pretty much everything. Meanwhile, the X-Ring is probably the best attachment for nearly every single pistol in this game, as they only suffer from rotational recoil, which is exactly what the X-Ring is all about. However, some guns suffer heavily from both rotational and horizontal recoil, and since there's no grip that functions effectively as a compensator, you want to get familiar with using the pistol grip that also primarily reduces rotational recoil, but it also functions pretty well at making your gun overall more stable when aiming down sights. Now before we move on, there are a few things worth knowing about attachments. First of all, no matter what anyone tells you, sight magnification does not affect your recoil. The recoil only visually feels rougher, as that's the trade-off for the zoom offering clearer targets. Secondly, the only times you want to be using suppressors is on guns that have practically no recoil stock like the MP7 and P90, as they provide such a little boost to the actual stats that they aren't actually worth using over the comp muzzle brake or the T-Break and X-Ring. And speaking of stats, learning how to understand the advanced stat page is essential to becoming a pro, as some really useful information is withheld in the advanced stat page, including some stats that can determine what attachments you should use. Let's take the sideways grip as an example. The sideways grip actually offers quite a few good things, such as making your gun overall more accurate at range while not having the usual grip downsides of lowering aim speed. But design-wise, the sideways grip's main purpose is to reduce rotational recoil, however in exchange it'll make your recoil lean more to the left. The way Phantom Forces makes this left lean effect happen is by altering the Z rotational stat. However, as with most attachments in this game, it does this by altering the stat by a certain percentage, meaning if you use guns that have a low Z rotational stat, you'll get all the benefits the sideways grip provides while completely disregarding its main downside or gimmick. But with that said, when you first open the page, it may seem like a bit much all at once, but there's nothing to worry about, as it all only looks more confusing than it actually is. So let's get the hang of things in the advanced stat page by starting off with weapon ballistics. If you've played Phantom Forces for a few rounds, you've probably noticed how fast you die in this game. This is due to the very low time to kill on most weapons, with guns sitting at 0.12 or below being incredibly good for aggressive CQC players. It's important to always pay attention to the time to kill, as it determines how good your gun is going to be for certain playstyles. But by far one of the most important stats a gun can have is its multipliers. Now, the standard multiplier most guns have is the 1.4 times head and the 1.0 times torso multiplier. Some guns may have a higher headshot multiplier like the G17 with a 1.5 times multiplier, allowing it to 2-shot headshot, or the Type 20 with its 1.05 times torso multiplier, turning its originally 5-shot kill at range into a 4-shot kill range alongside extending its 3-shot kill range. And speaking of damage and ranges, another really important stat is your weapon's damage range, as that determines how range efficient your gun is. Guns like the C7 have great ranges even with conversions, allowing them to do pretty pretty consistent damage at insanely far ranges. Meanwhile, guns like the alien pistol may seem good at first, but if they have next to no damage range, then in practice you'll feel like you're using a Nerf gun. Now, muzzle velocity is only really important when talking about snipers, as the more velocity a sniper has, the less you have to aim above to compensate for bullet drop, as muzzle velocity is basically just a fancy word for bullet speed. This is why you'll feel like you barely have to aim above someone when using the intervention compared to when you're using something like the AWS. And you're also able to increase or decrease muzzle velocity with barrel or ammo attachments. Now, the last thing you should take note of when looking at weapon stats is penetration depth. This stat determines how great or terrible your gun is at wallbanging enemies. Now, most weapon classes have a unique standard amount of penetration. For example, most assault rifles have 1 stud of penetration, which is just enough to shoot through thin walls like these. Meanwhile, lower caliber gun classes like PDWs or pistols often have 0.5 studs of penetration, which can barely shoot through anything. Although this stat can also be increased by using the armor-piercing ammo type, but I wouldn't recommend using it on guns with low penetration, as the armor-piercing ammo type is a percentage increase, not a set one, meaning you'd barely gain anything from using armor-piercing on something with below 1 stud penetration. The advanced stat page also has some more unique information if you scroll further down to weapon handling and miscellaneous. These pages include more interesting information such as weapon speed stats, crosshair behavior, and character stats like walk speed. This page can be especially useful if you're learning a new gun, since this page also displays some unique functions said gun may have, such as if it's able to chamber an extra round, if it's visible on the radar when firing, and what type of ammunition you're using, which is actually very useful to know since that determines what guns you're able to pick up additional ammo from. Anyways, now that we've covered all the essentials, if you want to learn what attachments actually do to your gun, you'll have to learn about the various accuracy stats that this page provides and how they work. Now, while there are 3 categories of accuracy stats, you'll mainly be focused on sight accuracy, as unless you're building a hipfire loadout, you won't need to pay too much attention to hipfire accuracy. And the regular accuracy stat is only really relevant for shotguns and a few secondary weapons, as it contains the choke stat, which basically determines how much bullets deviate from the original aiming point and can be altered by these attachments. Anyways, the accuracy stats are divided into 3 types of recoil on the X, Y, and Z axis. So let me explain these values with our first and main type of recoil, camera recoil. The first value of camera recoil affects vertical climb, the second value affects horizontal sway, and the third value affects rotational behavior. Now, when you spawn in, your mouse is automatically locked to the center of your screen. The way camera recoil affects you is basically by flinging your mouse in all directions, as your mouse determines where you're looking and in the same way where you're shooting. So if the camera kicks up, your mouse will move up along with it to stay centered. However, another thing about the camera is that your gun also follows it. So as your camera kicks up, your gun will follow along with the camera movement. This is why you'll notice attachments like the muzzle brake don't affect any other accuracy stats than camera recoil, because camera recoil is what determines how much vertical or horizontal recoil your gun has. But while vertical or horizontal recoil is prominent with most guns, there are certain other guns that suffer from things like rotational recoil. The first value of rotational recoil affects vertical rotation, the second value affects horizontal rotation, and the third value affects rotation in the view model. Now, the good thing about rotational recoil is the fact that it's easily identifiable, as it pretty much makes your spread draw a circle at range while also visibly moving the barrel of your gun when you're shooting. And the best part of rotational recoil is that it only has a few attachments that actually reduce rotational recoil, which makes it way less confusing to deal with in terms of choosing the best attachments. Lastly, there's recoil displacement, which is also known as transitional recoil. This recoil affects you by moving your gun across or closer to the camera. The first value of recoil displacement affects horizontal movement, the second value affects vertical movement, and the third value affects how close your gun will move to the camera. Now, recoil displacement is a little harder to identify because it acts pretty similarly to rotational and horizontal recoil, but luckily transitional recoil is combated by the same attachments used to reduce rotational recoil. But anyways, that's enough about the numbers. Let's get back into the gameplay. Now, as mentioned before, Phantom Forces is a very movement reliant game, and so the next thing to learn about movement is when to actually use it, as that's actually a key part of mastering movement. When you're in a gunfight, there are 5 movement techniques you want to utilize to dodge bullets: jumping, regular sliding, proning, super jumping, and lastly EMP sliding. Let's start off simple with jumping. Now, due to how Phantom Forces is coded, jumping to dodge bullets is entirely viable, as your accuracy in the air is practically the same as on the ground. This is why at mid-range, jumping can really save you from one-shot weapons that rely on torso multipliers to kill, because the enemy will end up hitting your legs rather than your torso. It's also important to still strafe while jump dodging, as when you jump you have a considerable velocity in the direction you're strafing. In fact, quick tip, if you ever run into somebody, the first thing you want to do is go in the exact opposite direction, as that will immediately throw off any sort of aim your enemy had to account for your previous direction. Next up is regular sliding. Repeating what I just said from jumping, sliding can be extremely effective for dodging enemy sprays, especially from a distance if you slide in the exact opposite direction you were moving, as your enemy probably isn't fully prepared to suddenly switch their aim direction immediately. Now, proning is incredibly useful at two ranges: really close quarters combat and really long range combat. In really close range combat, you want to crouch because your enemy will most likely be spraying straight forward but not at a downwards angle, so proning is a pretty reliable option to catch the enemy off guard. Now, one thing you guys may not know about proning is that it actually reduces your recoil and spread by quite a bit, so at far ranges not only will you become a harder target to hit, but you'll also have considerably better accuracy compared to standing up. Now let's jump on to the next topic, which is super jumping. Super jumping is by far one of the best techniques for dodging enemy sprays because it combines the benefits of both sliding and jumping in one move. Not only are you way up in the air dodging the enemy's directed spray, but you also quickly snap to a new location which can easily catch your enemy's aim off guard. Super jumping can also be used to reach higher up positions during gunfights, which is especially prominent on maps like Warehouse. However, remember that you won't be able to do any movement techniques other than jumping for a few seconds after super jumping. Sliding on to the last topic for this segment, EMP sliding is incredibly good to use for scenarios where people are just camping around corners, as its jump and speed boost allows you to get some serious mobility that the enemy most likely won't be able to follow or even react in time. Although I wouldn't recommend using EMP sliding over the others in their mentioned scenarios. Getting back into the gameplay now, let's talk about making each life effective to ensure longer and better lives. One feature that is truly underutilized is the squad deploy mechanic, because these teammate spawns can either get you in some really good positions, or just kill you and give your enemy a free double collateral. Now, I see a lot of people just rush to squad deploy on a random teammate as fast as possible, which honestly gets you killed more times than you'd think. Taking that extra second or two to quickly look through your teammates to see if they're in a good spawn or not can save you from hundreds of deaths relating to spawning on a teammate in a bad spot. You especially want to try and use teammates to quickly spawn on objective, good flanking routes, or near that one BFG camper who killed you last time. Another game mechanic that you seriously need to start using is spawning enemies. This feature is basically a free ballistics tracker that manually spots enemies by pressing E, and when I say you need to press E, I mean spam E whenever you're not doing something else, because not only does it make your enemy so much easier to see, especially at range, but it often gives you the ability to see where your enemy is behind walls, which can make wall banging a whole lot easier. Sticking to the topic of game features, you don't have to use your UI for much other than keeping track of your health, but one thing you also need to start paying attention to is your radar. This is because almost everyone favors literally anything over suppressors, so most of the lobby is going to be visible on the radar, which obviously gives away their positions when they shoot their gun. Now, if you're going for high kill games, using the radar is absolutely crucial to locating your enemies rather than just running around blindly. Now, when you're in combat, one crucial mistake is simply forgetting you have a secondary. While a primary can handle most situations, there will come a time when you run out of ammo mid-combat, and as the console itself advises, switching to your secondary is often faster than reloading. Don't be afraid to use your melee either, especially when picking off unsuspecting snipers, because some enemies can be hyper aware and instantly know you're flanking them the second you shoot your gun. Utilizing your entire loadout is absolutely crucial to improving at Phantom Forces, as one gun can't handle everything, and building an effective loadout ready for anything is what's going to propel you to the top of the leaderboard. But we'll get into building loadouts further along in this video. Another crucial but simple to fix mistake a lot of players make is overusing their ADS ability. See, there are actually some scenarios where ADSing is worse than hip firing, as by aiming in you're giving yourself a smaller field of view, which isn't exactly ideal when your enemy is literally in your face. Now, you should still use hipfire sparingly, as it's not the most reliable thing outside of 20 studs. However, in really close quarters combat, using hipfire will save you a lot. Speaking of saving, if there's one technique you should absolutely implement into your gameplay, then it's the knowledge of picking your fights. A lot of times, people die prematurely simply because they fire at everything that moves, including targets from half the map away. Now, while I get it can be cool and rather stylish to kill somebody half the map away, sometimes it's better to play the game a little bit tactically and moving closer for an easier kill, rather than completely giving yourself away just to kill some random on the other side of the map. Seriously, there's probably not a more powerful ability in an FPS game than picking your fights. Less about in-game tactics and more about gameplay mechanics, wallbanging is probably one of the most broken and heavily important mechanics to utilize out in the battlefield. Seriously, I'm not making this up. This mechanic is by far one of the strongest abilities in any first-person shooter, and an absolute must if you want to improve. Now, while one stub penetration may not seem like a lot at first, you'd be surprised how many surfaces you can actually shoot through. So with that said, if you're spraying after an enemy who's running towards a wall, don't stop shooting them after they've taken cover behind the wall, but rather keep on tracking them behind the wall, because chances are you'll be able to shoot through it. Now, this next step is so important that I can't stress it enough. It is absolutely essential to play the game with in-game audio on, as playing the game without it is practically like playing the game blind. Without in-game audio, you can't hear where the enemies are, and you'll never be able to decipher whether somebody's coming up to flank you, or if an enemy is standing right on top of you, etc. Being able to hear those footsteps is key to improving at the game, as without it you're severely handicapping yourself. Speaking of handicapping yourself, if there's one thing you need to pay attention to when playing on the various maps of Phantom Forces, then it's definitely the available cover. In a game like Phantom Forces where the characters have hitboxes the size of Canada, you're going to want to utilize any cover you can. Props like boxes, barrels, and small walls are great to crouch behind, as this usually does so less than half of your hitbox is vulnerable. But all that advanced talk is a bit hard to take in all at once, so let's cool it down and end this segment with a simple tip. When you're low on health, just stop. Seriously, taking a few seconds to take a step back and heal back up can save you from certain death. And this can still work for hyper-aggressive players because again, it's only a few seconds of patience to pay for a longer and better life. Learning to take a step back to just heal and decipher your next move for a moment will help you greatly in the long run. And before we stop this segment and move on to the next skill level, here's one final tip. In Phantom Forces you'll burn through ammo pretty fast since there's nearly always something to fire at, and so that's why you should always keep your ammo at a healthy amount by picking up ammo from enemy weapons whenever you can. This will help you prolong your lives, improve your KDR, and not awkwardly run out of ammo mid-fight. Now that we've covered all the essentials and must-knows, it's time to go for the final polishing to refine your gameplay to its peak level. A key part of being a pro at Phantom Forces is basically carrying your team and helping them out of tedious situations. One of the most common types of things you as a pro player will be dealing with is opposing Spawntrappers, because sometimes you aren't the first to start terrorizing the enemy spawn, and you therefore need to learn how to get out of a spawn trap. Now the obvious and easy answer to get out of a spawn trap would simply just to leave the server, but there are actually a few ways to go on with this task. The second easiest one is timing a good grenade if you're on a map like Metro. You can use your teammates to bait the spawn trapper out by running up a conveyor while you're timing a grenade to then throw it directly in the spawn trapper's face. Another way is to flank your own spawn. Some maps have flank routes available from spawn, like once again Metro. However, if this isn't the case, there's usually a teammate that's not at your spawn that you then can spawn on and head back to flank the spawn trapper who just flanked you. Getting your team out of a spawn trap is an ability that will allow you to single-handedly turn around a lot of matches on spawn trap heavy maps like Metro and Dunes. Another key thing that sets a lot of the pros apart from most other high ranks in Phantom Forces is knowing how early you can actually shoot. A lot of people start shooting when their gun is nearly fully aimed in, however you can actually begin shooting much earlier than this. In fact, your mouse clicks basically want to become a near same time clicks like EMP sliding, with only a small pause between right clicking to aim in and left clicking to shoot, which in practice looks like this. You'll see this in very high levels of play where they start shooting the moment their barrel is in the middle of their screen, because at that point you're probably centered enough to be able to hit your enemy's feet and start dealing damage. Now this may not seem like much, but in a game like Phantom Forces where you can die in a 10th of a second, shooting as early as you can will allow you to win a lot more gunfights even if the enemy is using a gun that kills earlier than yours. And on the topic of shooting earlier, pre-firing and prediction are by far one of the most important techniques a pro can utilize because of how insanely powerful they are. So let's cover them individually. Pre-firing is what's going to win you the majority of gunfights. This is because the winner of gunfights in Phantom Forces is usually determined by who shoots first, which usually comes in the form of enemies jumping you from weird angles at unexpected times. However, with in-game sound on, you're able to hear them coming in, so this is where a lot of pros begin firing ahead, expecting their enemies to come through the very same second. And a lot of the time, this usually works, as there isn't really any consequence unless you're using a low ammo gun. Prediction in Phantom Forces is also very important for high level play, and some weapon categories even rely on correct predictions to work well. Predicting where your enemy will go and being ready for them is what's going to heavily boost your average kills per game. And also in 1v1s, predictions can literally win you the entire game. But before we get any further into the gameplay, there's one art that a person must learn to become a true Phantom Forces pro: loadout building. Much like wanting to become a competitive Pokemon player, learning how to build an effective and strong combination is essential to performing well out on the battlefield. Now I do have a video that goes into all the details about this topic, and I heavily recommend you watch that first because this will be the criminally simplified version of that video. To do well out in the field, you're going to want to build a well-balanced loadout that can cover each other's weaknesses, which will allow you to win the majority of your gunfights in most situations. And there are a few ways to go on with this. You can either A, build a loadout where the primary is fixated on two main ranges with a secondary that covers the range the primary is weak at, alongside a melee that can work as a good finish-off tool like the stopper, or potentially a utility like the bare fists. Or B, build a loadout completely fixated on dominating at a single range with something like a fast-killing CQC PDW like the Chris Vector, alongside a high-damage pistol like the GLA-1 as a reliable finish-off tool and damage outputter, paired lastly with a melee of choice and high-velocity grenade. But that loadout format is not the only one you can go after. You can also go after what I call self-sustaining loadouts. If you've been watching this video so far, you'd have noticed that the gameplay segments are meant to improve lifetime and at the same time KDR. But obviously the more time you spend in one life, the more ammo you'll burn through. Now sure, there's a good chance you'll be able to pick up ammo for common gun types like assault rifles, but what if you're playing on Desert Storm when it's team deathmatch? And what about other more niche types of guns like sniper rifles, shotguns, and PDWs? Well, that's where your secondary choice can become an absolute lifesaver. See, a cool little thing you can do with your secondary is turning it into your very own ammo kit and become self-sustaining. For example, if you're using any assault rifle, you can pair it with the ARM pistol as it uses 5.56, which all assault rifles can pick up ammo from. However, the ARM pistol can also resupply most of the carbines alongside a few LMGs. Now if you're using a PDW, you can match it by pairing it with a lower caliber pistol, for example the Glock or M9 series. Alternatively, you can also use the coil gun for its high reserve ammo. If you're using a shotgun as your primary, you can pair with either of the traditional shotgun secondaries, although one thing to keep in mind is that you can pair them with guns with shotgun conversions, as when it's lying on the ground, the game decides it's not using snake shot but rather .44, and therefore your shotgun can't pick up ammo from it. And lastly, if you're using a bolt action sniper, you can pair it with the Obras as it single-handedly resupplies nearly half of the entire sniper category. Although keep in mind the Obras doesn't resupply niche bolt action sniper rifles like the AWS, K14 and AWM. For those you'll need to match their ammo type with the SAS 308. And another cool thing is you can actually also resupply 50 BMG sniper rifles with the SFG50. And before you ask, yes, this includes the NTW-20 with its cool little wall hack conversion, also known as 20x110mm. However, there is one downside to this loadout building format, and that is most DMRs and battle rifles aren't able to become self-sustaining, as Phantom Forces lacks a proper secondary that uses 7.62 ammo by default. However, there are a few exceptions for these two categories, which lies in the few guns that can access specific ammo conversions like the Beowulf ECR's access to 5.56 or the MSG-90's access to 308. However, if you're more interested in making a well-balanced loadout rather than a self-sustaining one, alongside maybe learning a few more tips and tricks to building a good loadout, I would heavily recommend watching my complete in-depth loadout building guide linked in the description below. But with that said, let's jump back into all the action. One thing you'll notice in high-level players is their increased use of cover. You'll see them using anything from car windows to random poles to protect themselves from bullets. This is because cover in Phantom Forces can be incredibly broken and you want to use it at basically every opportunity. For example, props like random boxes are pretty ideal as they are usually large enough to cover you entirely and you'll have 3 different angles to surprise the enemies from. However, props are far from the only thing you should use as cover. One crucial technique is using walls as cover, as it becomes especially great if you're using a gun with above average bullet penetration, as you'll be able to shoot through the same wall you're using as cover while your enemy cannot. In fact, you can actually take it one step further and do what's known as a head glitch. This is basically taking cover to the point where only your head is visible to other players while you're still able to fire just as easily at the fully visible enemies. Now there aren't that many designated head glitch spots that I can tell you about, however they are easy to discover by just crouching by a bunch of spots. In fact, one of the easiest head glitches to do is near ledges like these on Desert Storm or these shop stands on Metro. But all that cover usage talk is only so useful if you're familiar with the map you're playing on and the cover it has available, because some cover may not be covered directly but rather a sneaky position that's hard for your enemies to see you in, and some spots on certain maps are even better as both visibility and combat is extremely harsh for your enemy's side while being extremely forgiving on your side. Now the best way to learn these spots is simply by going into a small or private server and just jumping around to see what spots you can and cannot get to. But if you don't have a private server or aren't too keen on experimenting yourself, I have linked a few videos in the description that go over this topic in more specific detail. Now the last technique you want to implement into your gameplay is good positioning. This not only includes flanking, but also just routes and, well, positions in general. Good positioning is all about subconsciously deciding whether going to mid is really the best play. Maybe taking the side routes is better. Should I charge that guy straight on, or should I jump up somewhere else and get the advantage? Sometimes it's just best to hold your ground and defend an area with lots of cover to utilize. Sometimes it's better to deviate a little bit away from the usual sniper spots and use a more hidden and unexpected one. Maybe attacking the hill from afar is better than charging it head on. Positioning is also especially important when sniping because having a good but also hidden sniper spot can get you very far. For example, if you're sniping in a building, it's actually better to position yourself further away from the window, as this way you're much harder to spot compared to if you're standing right by the window frame. In fact, this goes for most indoor combat. You never want to stand right up by the window frame because it makes you a much easier target. Deciding where to move and whether it's smart based on the situation is all key aspects of developing good positioning, which eventually trains you into becoming an unpredictable menace to fight against. Now, if there's one true key aspect of Phantom Forces, then it's definitely movement. Seriously, staying agile and using every single movement technique in a sort of routine can get you very far. These routines come especially in handy when you're out in the open. One routine you can first practice is sliding to dodge enemies. After you're done sliding, jump in the opposite direction of the slide, and lastly, if there are more enemies coming into the fight, super jumping should get the jump on them. So just to repeat, this routine is slide, jump, if more enemies, super jump. Another smaller tip is using your enemy's kill cams against them. See, when you die in Phantom Forces, you'll spend 5 seconds staring into the back of an enemy's head. However, through the kill cam, you're also able to see the teammates around them and where the majority of them are. Not only does the kill cam allow for pretty easy revenge kills, but it can also be an important tool for discovering enemy positions. In fact, I recommend using kill cams to decipher where you're going to be heading in your next life. Now here's more of a psychological tip. If you're in a situation where your enemy is just about to turn a corner or leave your line of sight, try to land at least one shot on them and then hide until they get close. After they get close, you can super jump or slide out from your cover and catch the wandering enemy by surprise. This is because literally everyone turns around if they get shot in the back. It's a sort of instinct, you could say, and you can take advantage of that instinct by hiding immediately after so your enemy goes searching for you. Alternatively, you can wait for them to get distracted by a teammate and then strike shortly after. And as a finishing tip for this video, I want to talk to you guys about what I personally dubbed true combos. This technique is essentially shooting at specific body parts depending on the distance between you and your enemy. For example, if your enemy is at long range, shooting at the feet will result in much better accuracy, as your recoil rather than being a hindrance is actually helping you in this case by making your spray climb to the torso or even the head, whilst at the same time significantly improving the amount of shots that actually hit compared to manually controlling the recoil. But this tip stretches far beyond improving your long-range accuracy. The true combo technique can also be pretty useful for various secondary weapons with unique recoil animations like the Deagle L5 or MP412 Rex. By taking note of which way the recoil goes on those guns, you can aim at a certain point in the body which will guarantee the second shot to land. But as I said, this technique can go very far and there's far too many examples to go through in one video, so as a final additional tip, I urge you to go find as many of these true combos as possible, because making your gun's recoil a benefit rather than a hindrance will get you incredibly far. Well, with that said, that concludes this guide, and now you have everything you need to know in order to become a pro at Phantom Forces. If you found any part of this video helpful, show some support by dropping a like on this video and commenting the most helpful part to help guide others like you in the right direction. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe with notifications on, as these videos take a lot of time and work to make, and I have plenty of videos like these coming in the foreseeable future. But until next time, peace.